A slap rang out in the middle of our family dinner, instantly sucking the air out of the room. While everyone else stared at their plates in silence, I kept my eyes locked on the hand that had just struck my daughter. 5 minutes later, I walked out to the porch and dialed a number I had kept hidden for 30 years. By the time they realized they had crossed the wrong woman, everything they valued was already gone. My name is Eleanor Whitmore. I am 62 years old, a widow, and a retired emergency room nurse who has seen more broken bones and shattered spirits than anyone should have to in a single lifetime. I sat at the head of the dining table in my daughter's pristine suburban home in Willow Creek, watching the candlelight flicker against the polished crystal wine glasses. To an outsider, this dinner would look like a scene ripped from a holiday catalogue. There was the smell of rosemary and roasted pork filling the air, the soft clinking of silver against china, and the polite, bubbling laughter of extended family. But I was not an outsider. I was a mother. And I was watching the performance with the clinical detachment I had honed during 30 years of triage. My son-in-law, Daniel, sat opposite me. He was charming the room, telling a story about a merger at his firm, Northbridge Capital, while his brother and sister-in-law hung on his every word. My grandchildren, Leo and Sophie, were giggling at the far end of the table until Daniel shot them a sharp look, and they immediately went silent, shrinking into their chairs. Lauren, my beautiful daughter, was trying too hard. She moved around the table with a pitcher of water, her smile tight and brittle. As she poured water into my glass, her sleeve rode up just an inch. I saw them, faint, yellowish-green shadows on the inside of her wrist. Finger marks. She saw me looking and quickly tugged the fabric down, her eyes darting to her husband. "This roast is dry," Daniel said suddenly, cutting through the ambient chatter. The table went quiet. Lauren froze, the water pitcher still in her hand. I followed the recipe exactly. "Daniel, maybe it's just the crust." "It's salty," he said, dropping his fork onto the plate with a loud clatter. He looked at his brother and rolled his eyes. "I work 60 hours a week to pay for this kitchen, and she can't even manage a simple roast. It's pathetic, really." A few people chuckled nervously. "Oh, come on, Dan. It tastes fine to me," his cousin mumbled, but he didn't look up from his plate. "It's not fine," Daniel snapped, his voice rising. He reached for his wine glass, draining the red liquid in one long swallow before pouring another. I watched the flush creeping up his neck. I knew that flush. I had seen it on my own husband, Patrick, decades ago. It was the colour of violence waiting for an excuse. My heart began to hammer against my ribs, a familiar rhythm of dread, but I forced my face to remain a mask of stone. "I can make you something else," Lauren whispered, her voice trembling. "Please, let's not shut up." "Lauren, you're embarrassing yourself," Daniel sneered. "I'm just trying to." Daniel stood up so fast his chair screeched against the hardwood floor before anyone could blink. He grabbed Lauren's arm with one hand and swung the other. Smack. The sound was sickeningly loud, like a whip cracking in a library. Daniel's open palm connected with Lauren's cheek, snapping her head to the side. The silence that followed was absolute. The air seemed to vanish from the room. Lauren stood there, stunned, her hand flying to her face, tears instantly welling in her eyes. I looked around the table, waiting for his brother to jump up, waiting for his sister to scream, waiting for someone, anyone, to do something. Daniel's brother made a motion, as if to stand, then looked at Daniel's furious face and slowly sank back into his chair. His sister cleared her throat and looked at the centerpiece. "Well," a cousin said, his voice cracking. "Everyone is just a little stressed. Let's just finish eating." Someone quickly ushered the children into the living room, closing the door to mute their whimpers. No one looked at Lauren. No one looked at Daniel. And certainly, no one looked at me. I felt something inside me snap. It wasn't the hot, fiery rage of youth. It was something colder, sharper. It was a sterile, clean break, like a bone snapping under pressure. I realized then that this wasn't the first time he had hit her. It was just the first time he felt comfortable enough to do it in front of an audience. He thought he owned the room. He thought he owned her. He thought I was just a harmless old woman who depended on his charity. I stood up. My legs felt heavy, but my spine was steel. "I need to go outside," I said. My voice was low and even, betraying nothing. "I need some fresh air." "Yeah, you do that." "Eleanor?" Daniel grunted, sitting back down and stabbing a piece of meat with his knife. "Go get some air." I walked past my daughter. She was staring at her plate, a single tear dripping onto the tablecloth. I wanted to hug her, to scream, to tear his eyes out right there. But I knew that would only make it worse for her later. I had to be smarter. I had to be the surgeon, not the brawler. I stepped out onto the back porch and closed the sliding glass door behind me. The night air in Willow Creek was freezing, biting at my exposed skin. I welcomed the cold. It sharpened my mind. My hands were shaking as I reached into my cardigan pocket and pulled out my old smartphone. But my fingers were sure as I unlocked the screen. I scrolled through my contacts, past the doctors, past the pharmacy, until I found a name I hadn't dialed since the day Patrick died of a heart attack in our living room. Nora Blake, detective. I pressed the call button and held the phone to my ear, listening to the ring. 1 ring, 2 rings. Blake speaking. A raspy, tired voice answered. I took a deep breath, watching through the glass as Daniel laughed at something his brother said, while my daughter held an ice pack to her face in the background. "Nora." "It is Eleanor Whitmore," I said. "You told me once that if I ever saw a man raise a hand again, I should call you. Today." He just hit my daughter right in front of me. The wind on the porch bit through my cardigan. But the voice on the other end of the line was warm, grounded, and familiar. Nora Blake was no longer the rookie patrol officer I had known 30 years ago. She was now a seasoned detective in the county's domestic violence unit, and her tone shifted instantly from surprise to professional alertness. "Eleanor." "Take a breath," Nora said, her voice crackling slightly over the connection. "Is he still aggressive? Are the kids safe?" "They are inside," I whispered, turning my back to the glass door so Daniel could not see my lips moving. He sat back down to drink wine. Everyone is pretending it did not happen. I closed my eyes for a second, the image of a much younger Nora flashing in my mind. We used to stand together in the ambulance bay of the hospital at 3 a.m, smoking cigarettes we promised to quit, watching bruised women being wheeled in on stretchers. I remembered the night we made a pact, fueled by exhaustion and fury, that if this sickness ever touched our own lives, we would not be the silent witnesses we despised. "Listen to me carefully," Nora said, her voice dropping lower. "Has there been a report filed on him before? Anywhere in the state? No?" I answered, Lauren. She hides it. She just sent me a text message 5 minutes ago. It says, "Mum, please don't make a scene. It was an accident." Nora let out a long, frustrated breath. The classic script. If you call 911 right now, the uniformed officers will come. But if Lauren denies it, and there are no marks visible yet, and the witnesses, your family, refuse to speak up, the police cannot arrest him. They will leave, and then he will be angry. And you know what happens when they get angry after the police leave. I looked through the window. Daniel was pouring another glass of Pinot Noir, his face flushed but calm. The injustice of it burned in my throat. I wanted sirens. I wanted handcuffs. I wanted him humiliated. "So I do nothing," I hissed, my hand gripping the phone so tight my knuckles turned white. "I just watch him eat roast pork after slapping my child." "No," Nora said sharply. "We do not do nothing. We do it smart. You said he works in finance, high level." "Yes." "Northbridge Capital." "Good," Nora said. And I could practically hear the gears turning in her head. Men like that. They don't fear jail as much as they fear poverty. They fear losing their status. Sometimes the fastest way to stop a predator like him is not a cell, but his wallet. You take away his job, his reputation, the title of successful family man that he wears like a shield, and you cripple him. I stared into the dark kitchen where the silhouette of my family moved like ghosts. I was torn. Part of me, the mother bear, wanted to rush in with a carving knife. But the nurse in me, the one who knew triage, knew Nora was right. An arrest that did not stick would only escalate the violence. We needed a tourniquet before we could perform surgery. "Here is the plan," Nora continued, her voice steady and commanding. "Step 1. You document everything. I want dates, times, direct quotes, and witnesses. Step 2. You get Lauren alone, away from him, and we make a safety plan. Step 3. You get me everything you can on his employment contracts. Most of these big firms have strict clauses about domestic abuse. If we can prove he is a liability to his firm, we cut off his supply. It feels too slow," I admitted, my voice trembling. "It is the only way to make sure that when he falls, he stays down." Nora replied, "If you do your part, Eleanor, I promise you, I will do mine to the very end." "Okay," I whispered. "Okay." I hung up the phone and slipped it back into my pocket. The cold air no longer felt biting. It felt clarifying. I walked back inside, ignoring the curious glances from the table, and went straight to my purse in the hallway. I pulled out a thick, leather-bound notebook I usually used for grocery lists. I sat down on the bench in the foyer, opened the notebook to a fresh page, and uncapped my pen. My hand hovered over the paper for a moment. Then, I wrote the header in bold, dark ink, "The Daniel Whitaker File." Underneath, I wrote the date. I wrote the time. I wrote the names of everyone at the table who had looked away. Subject struck victim on the left cheek with an open palm. Force was sufficient to snap her head back. Subject showed no remorse. Witnesses present 6. I put the pen down. My hands were shaking. But as I looked at the ink on the page, I realized the sensation wasn't fear. It was the adrenaline of a soldier who had just stepped onto the battlefield. I had spent a lifetime being a peacekeeper. Tonight, I was starting a war. I woke up with a stiff neck on the beige sofa of my small cottage in Willow Creek. The air in the living room smelled of stale coffee from yesterday and the faint, damp scent of old wood that never quite left this house after a rainstorm. I stared at my hands resting on the knitted blanket. They looked old, veined and spotted, but they were steady now. The trembling from last night, from that call with Nora in the freezing cold, had passed. Now, only a cold clarity remained. It seemed like a lifetime ago that Daniel first sat at my dining table. He had been 26 then, wearing a crisp white Oxford shirt that seemed too bright for my dim room. He spoke with a smooth, practiced cadence about his position at Northbridge Capital, using words like equity and diversification as if they were casual dinner conversation. My sister had whispered to me then that he had a future. She said Lauren was lucky. I remembered nodding, dazzled by his confidence, relieved that my daughter had found a man who seemed so put together. I should have seen the cracks in the porcelain even then. There were the little jokes he made about Lauren's weight or her choice of dress. He would say things like, "Oh, honey, you know, you don't have the ankles for those heels," with a smile that did not reach his eyes. Then came the credit cards. He took them from her just 2 months after the wedding. He claimed it was for convenience, and that he could manage their rewards points better if everything went through one account. I felt a prickle of unease back then, a small knot in my stomach. But I swallowed it. I told myself that young couples did things differently these days. The truth was harder to admit. I swallowed my doubts because I had spent 20 years swallowing the same poison with my own husband. Patrick never hit me. That was the line I used to defend him to myself for 2 decades. But he threw chairs. He slammed doors until the frames cracked. I remembered a dinner when Lauren was 7 years old. Patrick had smashed a dinner plate against the wall, inches from her small face. Because the potatoes were cold. I had frozen, just like the family did last night. I taught my daughter that silence was safety. I taught her that enduring a man's rage was part of a woman's duty to keep the peace. After Patrick died of a heart attack, leaving us with debt and silence, I raised Lauren alone. I turned down dates. I turned down companionship. I was terrified that behind every polite smile was another man waiting to punch a hole in my drywall. When Lauren told me she was marrying Daniel, I saw a flicker of something cold in his eyes when he talked about their joint financial future. It was a predator's calculation. But I buried that instinct deep. I wanted her to be taken care of. I wanted to believe that the cycle of anger had broken with me. Over the last few years, the distance between us grew. It was not sudden. It was a slow erosion. Daniel started dictating the schedule. He would tell me on the phone, "Eleanor, you really need to call 3 days ahead. We have plans. We value our privacy." I became a guest in my daughter's life, allowed in only when he permitted it. Sitting in the morning light, I replayed the last year in my head. I thought about the long sleeves Lauren wore in July. I thought about the way she flinched when a door slammed. I remembered the vague excuses. Last Thanksgiving, she had a bruise on her hip and said, I just bumped into the counter. I am so clumsy." I had nodded. I had looked away. I had chosen the comfort of blindness over the horror of sight. I reached for the notepad on the coffee table and a pen. My hand moved across the paper, carving the words into the page with a force that nearly tore the sheet. This time, my daughter will not live her whole life in a house that everyone sees but no one helps. Not even me. I set the pen down. It was not a wish. It was a contract. The next morning, I turned my dining room table into a forensic lab of paper. I pulled out every file folder, every bank statement, and every insurance policy I had accumulated over the last decade. For years. I had let Daniel handle the complicated digital stuff because he insisted it was faster. He would come over with his laptop, click a few buttons, and tell me where to sign. I had signed because I trusted him. I had signed because I thought he was the son I never had. Now, looking at the fine print with my reading glasses perched on my nose, I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. Daniel had not stolen from me, not in the traditional sense. There were no missing thousands, no drained savings accounts. It was subtler than theft. It was a web. He had listed himself as the primary emergency contact on my life insurance. He was the authorized advisor on my retirement accounts, granting him view-only access that allowed him to track every penny I spent. On my main checking account, he was a co-signer for convenience, a status he claimed was necessary in case I ever fell ill and needed someone to pay my bills. He had not robbed me. He had leashed me. I drove to the local branch of my bank at 10 in the morning. The air inside smelled of carpet cleaner and money. A few tellers looked up as I entered, their expressions shifting from boredom to that familiar, patronizing patience reserved for elderly women with checkbooks. I walked straight to the desk of a young personal banker named Mitchell. He looked to be about 24, with a tie that was slightly too wide and a smile that felt rehearsed. "Good morning, Mrs. Whitmore," Mitchell said, glancing at his computer screen. "How can we help you today? Did you forget your online password again? I see here that Mr. Whitaker usually handles the resets for you." "No, Mitchell," I said, sitting down and placing my hands flat on the cool desk surface. "I am not here for a password. I want to revoke all third-party authorizations on every account under my name. I want Daniel Whitaker removed. Today—" Mitchell blinked, his smile faltering. "Oh, well, Mrs. Whitmore, Mr. Whitaker is listed as a co-signer. It is usually better to keep family on there for emergencies. Are you sure you do not want to just maybe call him first?" "I am quite sure," I said, my voice sharp enough to cut glass. "And if you look closely at the authorization forms, you will see that my signature is the primary one. His privileges are revocable at my sole discretion. Revoke them." Mitchell typed for a moment, his brow furrowing. "Okay. Wow. He is on everything. Even the safe deposit box access. This might take a few minutes." "Take your time," I replied. "And Mitchell, I want a printed log of every time his user ID accessed my accounts in the last 12 months, and a list of every recurring transfer he set up." "I can do that," he said, tapping the keys with newfound respect. "Is everything okay? Mrs. Whitmore, is this fraud?" "It is housekeeping," I said. An hour later, I walked into the dusty, wood-panelled office of Mr. Harris, the attorney who had handled Patrick's estate years ago. He was an old man now, with skin like parchment paper and a suit that smelled of pipe tobacco. He offered me a peppermint from a crystal bowl, just as he had done when I was a weeping widow 30 years ago. "This is a significant change, Eleanor," Mr. Harris said, looking over the draft I had marked up. "You are moving the house, the savings, and the life insurance proceeds into a blind trust, specifically for the benefit of Lauren and the grandchildren, with an independent trustee." "Yes," I said. "Daniel cannot touch a cent of it. Not now, not if I die, and certainly not if they divorce." Mr. Harris took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "This effectively cuts him out of any inheritance. It also means if he tries to claim your assets as marital property in a separation, he will hit a wall. You are building a fortress. Eleanor. Why the sudden urgency? I looked at the old man who had known my family for decades. I could have lied. I could have said I was just being prudent. But I was tired of the silence. I decided to stop funding the hand that hit my daughter. I said. Mr. Harris stopped rubbing his nose. He looked at me for a long moment, his eyes hardening. He did not ask for details. He did not offer empty platitudes. He simply picked up his pen. Smart move, he said gruffly. We can also structure this so the trust provides a housing allowance for Lauren immediately, should she need to secure a residence separate from her husband. It gives her an exit strategy that he cannot block financially. Do it, I said. I spent the next 40 minutes signing papers. My signature was slow, deliberate, and heavy with ink. With every loop of my pen, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. I was cutting the strings. I was taking back the house he thought was his future inheritance. I was taking back the security he used to threaten my daughter. When I left the law office, it was past 1 in the afternoon. I stopped at a small coffee shop on the corner, a place with fancy Italian machines and overpriced pastries. I ordered a large cappuccino with extra foam, costing $6. I sat by the window, watching the people rush by outside. I took a sip of the hot, frothy coffee. It tasted bitter and rich. For years, I had scrimped and saved, worried that if I spent too much, Daniel would make a comment about my dwindling liquidity at Sunday dinner. I realized then how small I had made myself to fit into his box. A lot of women get hit and still have to pay for the coffee of the man who hit them. I whispered to the empty chair across from me. I will not be one of them anymore. I began to collect data with the patience of a spider spinning a web. Every time I visited Lauren's house, I stopped looking at the flowers and started looking at the angles. My eyes kept drifting to the house next door, where Mr. Johnson lived. He was a retired engineer who loved to brag about his new security system. He had a sleek, black doorbell camera mounted right on the brick pillar facing Lauren's driveway. It was an unblinking eye that saw everything my daughter tried to hide. One Tuesday afternoon, while I was pretending to admire Mr. Johnson's hydrangeas, I leaned over the fence. Those are beautiful cameras. Bob, I said, pointing my gardening shears at the pillar. Do they really record 24 hours a day? He puffed out his chest, eager to show off his toys. Oh, absolutely. Eleanor. Cloud storage. High definition. I can see a delivery truck coming from 2 blocks away. Does it record sound? I asked, keeping my voice light, as if I were just a curious old woman. Crystal clear, he said. Then he paused, his smile fading just a fraction. Sometimes a little too clear. The microphone picks up everything from the street. I knew what he meant. He had heard them. He had heard the shouting matches that spilled out of the front door. I looked him dead in the eye. Bob, I said softly, if you ever have a recording, say, of shouting near the porch, or someone being pulled back inside the house, would you keep it for me just in case? He looked at me, confused at first, and then a dawn of understanding crossed his face. He looked at Lauren's house, then back at me. He nodded slowly. I think I understand. You are just being a good mother. I will keep an eye out. I did not stop there. I started tracking Daniel's schedule in my notebook. I noticed he came home late on Tuesdays and Thursdays, often smelling of a cloying, floral perfume that certainly did not belong to my daughter. I did not care about the infidelity. In fact, I welcomed it. A man having an affair was a man with a fixed schedule, and a fixed schedule meant I could plan escape windows for Lauren. I followed Nora's advice and went to the elementary school to speak with Molly's teacher, Mrs. Gable, during parent-teacher conference week. I sat in the small plastic chair, my knees aching, and asked if Molly seemed happy. Mrs. Gable hesitated, tapping her pen on her gradebook. Molly is a sweet girl. Mrs. Whitmore. But she is very watchful, especially around 3 in the afternoon. 3 o'clock, I repeated. Just before school ends. Yes, Mrs. Gable said, lowering her voice. She watches the clock, and if a male voice gets too loud in the hallway, she flinches. She is very protective of her mother. If Lauren is even a minute late, Molly starts to panic. It is unusual for a 7-year-old. That night, Nora called me with another piece of the puzzle. She had been digging through old police logs, things that did not make it to a criminal record, but existed in the field notes. I found his name. Nora said, 10 years ago, a bar fight in downtown Chicago. He wasn't the one arrested. He was listed as a witness, but the responding officer made a note in the margin. The bartender told the cop that Daniel was the one who started it, goading the other guy until he swung first. The bartender called him a mean drunk with a lawyer's mouth. So he has always been this way, I said, gripping the phone. He is smart about it. Nora replied. He provokes, then plays the victim. But Eleanor, Northbridge Capital, his firm. They are very big on public image. They spend millions on charity galas to show how much they value the American family. If they found out their rising star was beating his wife, they would drop him faster than a hot stone to protect their stock price. I hung up and looked at the financial documents spread on my kitchen table. I found the loan papers from 5 years ago. I had loaned them $50,000 for the down payment on that house. Daniel had signed the promissory note. He liked to act like the self-made man, the provider. But the truth was, in black and white right in front of me, he was living in a house my money helped buy, building a reputation on a foundation I helped lay. I closed the thick notebook labeled the Daniel Whitaker file. It was heavy now, filled with dates, times, witness accounts, and financial records. I ran my hand over the cover. It felt solid. It felt like I was not just writing notes. I was laying bricks. I was building a wall around my daughter, one piece of evidence at a time. And Daniel was too arrogant to see that he was already trapped inside. I invited Lauren to lunch at a diner on the edge of town, a place with cracked vinyl seats and the heavy smell of frying onions. I chose it deliberately. It was public. It was loud. And it was a place Daniel would never set foot in because he considered it beneath him. Lauren slid into the booth opposite me. She looked tired, her movements skittish and small. As she bent down to place her purse on the floor, her collar shifted. I saw it. A faint, yellowish bruise on the side of her neck, fading but undeniable. It looked like the shadow of a thumb. I waited until the waitress poured our coffee before I spoke. Do you remember the blue ceramic bowl? I asked, wrapping my hands around my mug. The one your father threw against the wall when you were 8 years old. Lauren blinked, looking at the menu with intense fascination. I don't know what you're talking about. Mom? He threw it because the potatoes were cold. I continued, my voice steady. It shattered right next to your head. A piece of it cut your ear. I don't remember that, she insisted, though her hand drifted up to touch her earlobe. Dad was... He had a temper, but he loved us. Just because you don't remember it does not mean it didn't shape you, I said. I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers. She flinched, then settled. Lauren, I saw what happened at dinner. I saw him hit you. She pulled her hand away immediately, her eyes darting around the diner. Mom, please, keep your voice down. It was just a bad night. He had too much wine. I shouldn't have argued with him in front of his brother. You know how much pressure he is under at the firm. It was the script. The exact same script Nora had told me to expect. It broke my heart to hear my intelligent, vibrant daughter reciting lines written by her abuser. He called you useless. I said, he didn't mean it, she said, her voice rising in pitch. He apologized this morning. He brought me flowers. He is really trying. Mom, you don't see the good days. I took a deep breath. I knew arguing facts would not work. She was too deep in the fog of preservation. I had to be the one to use the one thing she loved more than she feared him. Lauren, I said softly. Look at me. She raised her eyes, swimming with unshed tears. If you looked at Molly 10 years from now, I asked, and you saw her husband slap her across the face because a roast was dry, would you tell her to stay? Would you tell her it was her fault for arguing? The air seemed to freeze between us. Lauren opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She stared at me, and I watched the realization crash over her. Her chin started to tremble. She choked out. I would kill him. Then why is it good enough for you? She crumbled, shoulders sagging. She covered her face with her hands. I don't know what to do. I am scared. Mom, it's not just the slap. Tell me, I commanded gently. He grabs me, she whispered through her fingers. When he is angry, he pushes me against the wall until I can't breathe. Last week, he threw my phone into the backyard because I didn't answer a text fast enough. He told me that if I ever tried to leave, he would bury me in court. He said, "You have no money. Lauren, you have nothing. I will take the kids, and you will never see them again." My blood turned to ice. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to drag her to the police station right now. But I heard Nora's voice in my head, warning me about judges who believe wealthy men over hysterical housewives. I reached into my purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I slid it across the table. "This is not nothing," I said. Lauren looked at it. It was a list of legal rights for victims in our state, the number for a domestic violence hotline, and the address of a secure shelter. "This looks real," she stammered, terrified. "If he finds this..." "He won't," I said, "because you are going to leave it with me. Listen to me. Lauren, we are going to be smart. Starting next week, when you come to visit, bring 1 or 2 things. Important papers, birth certificates, passports, a few toys the kids love. We will hide them in my attic. But the money..." She wept. "He tracks every cent. I have money." I lied, though with the changes I had made with Mr. Harris, it was practically the truth. "I have enough to house you, feed you, and fight him for 5 years if I have to. You are not alone in this." Lauren looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in years. "You would do that, I am your mother," I said. "I would burn the world down to keep you warm." We walked out to the parking lot an hour later. The wind was picking up. I pulled her into a hug, holding her tight against my chest. As I buried my face in her neck, I waited for the scent of vanilla and jasmine, the perfume she had worn since college. It was gone. Instead, she smelled like cheap laundry detergent and stale fear. He had stripped away even her scent, replacing it with the generic smell of a woman who was trying to disappear. I let her go, watched her get into her car, and promised myself that by the time I was finished with Daniel Whitaker, my daughter would smell like flowers again. The shark in the water senses when the prey stops trashing. Daniel sensed it too. When Lauren stopped arguing and started becoming quiet, hiding her phone and coming home 10 minutes late. His antenna went up, but he did not strike immediately. Instead, he switched tactics. He became the charming suitor again. He came home with bouquets of expensive lilies. He bought her a diamond bracelet that I knew cost more than $3,000. He held her hands at dinner and said things like, "I am sorry, baby. The stress at the office is just eating me alive. If you want, we can go to counseling. I will do anything." It was a performance. I knew it. Lauren knew it. But we played our parts. Then, he came for me. Daniel showed up at my doorstep on a Thursday evening, holding a bottle of aged Cabernet. He flashed that blinding, sales floor smile. "Mom," he said, using the term he knew melted the hearts of my friends. "I thought you might be lonely. Let's have a drink." I ushered him in, moving a little slower than usual, deliberately fumbling with the coasters. I played the part of the lonely, slightly confused widow to perfection. As I went to the kitchen to get the corkscrew, I slid my phone out of my pocket, hit the red record button on the voice memo app, and placed it face down on the coffee table, right next to the bowl of potpourri. We sat. He poured. He sighed. A heavy, dramatic sound meant to elicit sympathy. "It is hard, Mom," he said, swirling the red liquid. "The market is volatile. I carry so much weight on my shoulders, providing for Lauren, for the kids, and making sure you are comfortable too. You know I always look out for you." "Right. Oh, I know." "Daniel," I said, my voice wavering just enough. I don't know what I would do without you handling the bills. The numbers, they just confuse me so much these days." He took the bait. His chest puffed out. "Exactly. That is why I handle it. Actually, I made a move this week, a brilliant move. I took a chunk of liquidity from our joint savings, about $20,000, and moved it into a private crypto fund a buddy of mine runs. It is not technically on the Northbridge books yet." I blinked, feigning ignorance. "Is that allowed? It sounds risky." He laughed, a dismissive, arrogant bark. "Rules are for the analysts, Mom, not for the closers. Northbridge has all these compliance hurdles. Don't trade personal funds without disclosure. Don't use unapproved platforms. Whatever. By the time they see the returns, I will have doubled the principal. They won't care how I did it. No one asks questions when you are winning." I sipped my wine to hide the smile that wanted to curl on my lips. He had just confessed to a direct violation of SEC compliance regulations and his company's internal trading policy. Later that night, I sent the audio file to Nora. Her text came back 5 minutes later, hot him. "This is misappropriation and an unreported outside business activity. In his contract, this is immediate termination territory, and if he loses his license, he is done. 2 days later. I was at Lauren's house helping with the laundry. I was upstairs, folding towels, when I heard Daniel's voice in the hallway below. He was leaving for work, and his tone was low and venomous. "You have been spending a lot of time with your mother," he hissed. "She is lonely." "Daniel," Lauren replied, her voice soft but steady. "She is a leech," he spat. "Don't think she can save you." "Lauren, if you ever try to leave, remember who pays her heating bill. That old woman depends on my money even more than you do. You walk out, and she starves." I stood at the top of the stairs, clutching a fluffy white towel. The anger that flared in my chest was hot, but it was quickly replaced by a cold, dark amusement. "Depends on you," that evening. Back in the safety of my kitchen, I pulled out the new bank folder I had organized with Mr. Harris. I ran my finger down the lines of the trust fund, the independent savings account, the deed to my house, which was now fully protected. My name stood alone on every document. No co-signer, no advisor. "Dependent," I whispered to the empty room. "I don't think so." Daniel tried to tighten the noose. He started telling Lauren that I was losing my mind. "Your mother is getting senile," he told her over dinner, loud enough for the kids to hear. "She forgets things. She is meddling. We need to distance ourselves so people don't think we are unstable like her." He thought he was building a wall between us. He did not realize he was pushing Lauren right into my arms. Every insult he threw at me was another reason for her to pack another box of documents to smuggle out. On Friday, Nora called me. "It is done," she said. "I have a contact in the compliance department at Northbridge, an old friend who hates bullies. I sent the recording and the transfer records anonymously. They are opening an internal file on Monday. It is a ticking time bomb. Eleanor, he is walking around on a floor that is about to collapse. I went to bed that night, but I did not sleep immediately. I stared at the ceiling fan cutting through the shadows. For 40 years, I had reacted to men. I had dodged their anger, soothed their egos, and cleaned up their messes. Tonight felt different. I felt a strange vibration in my fingertips. I was not just reacting anymore. I was pulling the chair out from under a man who thought he was sitting at the head of the table, and I was not doing it with a scream or a slap. I was doing it with a piece of paper and the law. The phone call from Mr. Harris came on a rainy Tuesday morning, bringing with it a piece of information I had completely forgotten, yet one that would change the entire landscape of our battlefield. "Eleanor, I have been reviewing the original deed for the house on Maple Street," Mr. Harris said, his voice crackling slightly over the line. "Do you recall that when the kids bought the place, your down payment was structured not as a gift, but as an equity buy-in?" I paused, holding my coffee cup mid-air. I think so. It was 10 years ago. I just wanted to help them get the mortgage approved. "Well, that help bought you a stake," he continued. "Legally, you own 10% of that property, and more importantly, your name is on the title as a tenant in common. That means Daniel cannot refinance, take out a second mortgage, or use the home as collateral for a business loan without your physical signature." I set the cup down slowly. A cold smile touched my lips. That 10%, which I had always considered just a mother's contribution, was actually a shackle. If Daniel had tried to leverage the house to cover his secret losses, he would have had to forge my signature, or he was blocked entirely. Either way, I had him. That afternoon, Lauren and I met with Mrs. Kelly, a family law attorney recommended by Nora. Her office was small but intimidating, filled with books on domestic litigation. Mrs. Kelly was a sharp woman in her 50s who listened to our story without blinking. "We have a strategic advantage," Mrs. Kelly said, leaning forward and clasping her hands. "Usually, I advise filing for a protective order immediately, but given what you have told me about the internal investigation at his firm, we wait." Lauren looked up, her eyes wide with panic. "Wait. But he is escalating. He yells every night. We wait for the exact moment the hammer drops at his job." Mrs. Kelly explained, her voice softening but remaining firm. "When Northbridge suspends him, he will be in shock. His ego will be shattered. That is when we serve him with the divorce papers and the restraining order. If we time this right, the court will see a man who has lost his job for ethical violations and is unstable. It destroys his credibility regarding custody. If we strike while he is still the golden boy of finance, he fights back with expensive lawyers. If we strike when he is broken, he folds." I looked at my daughter. She was twisting her wedding ring, a nervous habit she had developed recently. The plan sounded ruthless. It sounded like something Daniel would do, but then I remembered the sound of that slap. I remembered him threatening to take my grandchildren. "We do it," I said. "We wait for the fall." We outlined a three-pronged attack. First, the dossier of abuse I had been compiling, complete with the neighbor's statement and Lauren's testimony. Second, the inevitable firing from Northbridge for his financial misconduct. And third, my 10% stake in the house, which I would use to block him from selling the property to liquefy assets. Later that week, I began covertly preparing my home. I cleared out the guest room and the study. I bought 2 sets of dinosaur-patterned bedsheets for the grandchildren. I bought a nightlight shaped like a star. As I smoothed the fresh pillowcase onto the small pillow, my heart hammered against my ribs. It wasn't fear. It was the realization that this was really happening. My house was turning into a fortress. When Lauren came over on Saturday to drop off a box of winter clothes for storage, she looked pale. "Mom," she whispered in the kitchen, checking over her shoulder even though we were alone. "He asked me to sign something yesterday. A bank authorization," he said. "He said it was just to consolidate some credit card debt to get a better rate. Did you sign it?" I asked, gripping the edge of the counter. "No," she said, her voice trembling. I told him. "I need to ask Mom first, because she helps with the accounting." He went crazy. He threw a vase. He screamed that I was a stupid child who couldn't make a decision without you. "You did good." I soothed her, rubbing her back. "You did exactly right." I called Nora immediately after Lauren left. It took her only an hour to confirm what I suspected. "He is drowning." "Eleanor," Nora said. "He put almost $200,000 into some unregulated cryptocurrency scheme, hoping to double it before the quarter ended. It crashed. He is trying to plug the hole before the auditors at Northbridge see it. If Lauren had signed that paper, he would have drained your joint equity. He is desperate," I said, "and desperate men are dangerous." Nora warned, "Be ready." That night, I sat alone in my kitchen. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound. Spread out before me on the wooden table were 3 distinct stacks of paper. On the left, the abuse log and legal drafts. In the center, the property deed proving my 10% ownership. On the right, the printouts of his financial ruin that Nora had gathered. I reached out and straightened the edges of the stacks, aligning them perfectly. I felt like a general looking at a map of the terrain. For years, Daniel had treated us like pawns, silent, obedient, expendable. He never imagined that while he was playing checkers, I was learning to play chess. I turned off the kitchen light, leaving the papers sitting there in the dark, ready for the endgame. On Friday morning, the email from Northbridge Capital landed in Daniel's inbox. He told Lauren it was just a routine compliance audit, a standard checkup that all senior managers had to endure. But I knew the truth. Nora had told me that the subject line read, "Immediate review of personal holdings," and that he was required to bring physical records of all his outside investment accounts. I watched him that evening when he came to pick up the children. He was vibrating with a nervous energy he tried to pass off as excitement. He tapped his foot against the floorboards of my porch, checking his watch every 30 seconds. "Big week coming up. Eleanor?" he said, flashing a smile that looked more like a baring of teeth. Going to be making some big moves. While he was posturing on my porch, my daughter was quietly dismantling her life with him, following my exact instructions. Lauren had packed a single, nondescript gym bag. She hid it beneath the spare tire in the trunk of her sedan. Inside were birth certificates, social security cards, a month's supply of asthma inhalers for Leo, and 3 changes of clothes. It was a go bag, the kind soldiers pack when they are behind enemy lines. On Saturday afternoon, I borrowed my granddaughter, Molly, for a few hours. We stood in my kitchen, flour dusting the countertops like snow, making an old-fashioned apple pie. The rhythmic motion of kneading dough seemed to soothe the anxiety radiating off the child. "Your Grandpa Patrick loved this pie," I told her, pressing the crust into the tin. He was a man who loved big flavors. But you know, Molly, sometimes people who love us can still be wrong. Molly looked up at me, her large eyes watchful. "Grandpa used to get very loud," I continued, keeping my voice low and steady. "He used to break things when he was mad. And I made a mistake. Sweetie. I stayed quiet because I thought that was my job." I stopped and turned her to face me, wiping a smudge of flour from her nose. "I want you to remember something. No one has the right to raise a hand to you. Not ever. Even if they say they love you to death. Do you understand?" Molly nodded slowly, and for a second, I saw a flash of wisdom in her eyes that no 7-year-old should possess. "Like Daddy," she whispered. My heart broke, but I simply nodded. Yes, like Daddy. That evening, a text message from Daniel lit up Lauren's phone. "Sunday night, dinner at Mum's house. I want the whole family there. I will apologize to her in front of everyone. We are going to start over." Lauren called me in a panic. "He wants to come over." "Mum. He says he wants to make peace. I think he feels control slipping away. Let him come," I said, my voice cold steel. "Accept the invitation." I called Nora immediately. We realized that Daniel was trying to stage a performance. He wanted to secure his home front before facing the firing squad at work on Monday. He wanted to lock us down with guilt and charm. "It is perfect," Nora said. "He will be in one place. He will be relaxed. He will think he is the king of the castle." Sunday evening arrived with a grey, heavy sky. I stood before the hallway mirror, brushing my silver hair. I picked up the pearl hair clip Lauren had given me for my 50th birthday. I fastened it into place and looked at my reflection. I searched my own eyes for any trace of sadness, any lingering affection for the charming young man who had once asked for my daughter's hand. I found nothing. That young man had died years ago, suffocated by the ego of the monster who had replaced him. I went into the kitchen and checked the oven. I was roasting a chicken with lemon and rosemary, Daniel's absolute favourite meal. It was not a gesture of love. It was a dark, private irony. I wanted him to be full, comfortable, and arrogant. I wanted him to savour the taste of his authority one last time before I starved him of everything, 10 minutes before 6. My phone buzzed. It was Nora. "The judge signed the order an hour ago," she said. "The compliance officer from Northbridge is with us. We are 2 blocks away. Just keep him calm. When we knock, you open the door. I am ready." I said. I heard the car doors slam in the driveway. The front door opened, and Daniel strode in, carrying a bottle of wine and wearing his best cashmere sweater. He looked the picture of the successful suburban father. "Eleanor," he boomed, coming into the kitchen with a wide, magnanimous smile. "Something smells incredible," I told Lauren. "No one cooks a bird like your mother." Lauren followed him in, looking pale and ghostly, clutching her purse with white-knuckled hands. The children ran past him, fighting over who got the chair nearest the window. "Hello, Daniel," I said, turning to face him. "You are right on time." He poured the wine, laughing at his own jokes, completely unaware that the air in the room had changed. He sat at the head of the table, my table, and raised his glass. I stood by the kitchen counter, listening to the rhythm of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Tick, tick, tick. He thought he was at a reconciliation dinner. He did not know he was already at his own wake. The dinner was a masterclass in manipulation. Daniel tapped his wineglass with a fork, waiting for the room to fall silent. He stood up, smoothing the front of his cashmere sweater, and delivered a speech that was as polished as it was hollow. He spoke about the immense pressure of the market, about how he had lost his way due to stress, and how he needed us to be his anchor. The relatives nodded sympathetically, murmuring their support. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, my face a blank canvas. I did not clap. He turned to me then, reaching across the table to cover my hand with his. His palm was warm and damp. "I know I have been distant, Mom," he said, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. "I know you depend on us for everything. I promise. I will not let you worry about your security ever again." The room held its breath, waiting for the grateful widow to tear up. Instead, I slowly, deliberately slid my hand out from under his. I placed it back in my lap. The rejection was small, but in the silence of the room, it screamed. His sentence hung in the air like a confession he hadn't meant to make. Just as Daniel opened his mouth to salvage the moment, a sound cut through the house. Knock, knock, knock. It was not a frantic pounding. It was heavy, authoritative, and patient. The conversation at the table died instantly. Everyone turned to look toward the hallway. I did not look. I simply placed my napkin on the table, stood up, and walked to the door without saying a word. I opened it to reveal the cavalry. 2 uniformed county police officers stood on the porch. Behind them was a woman in a sharp grey suit, holding a leather briefcase, the compliance officer from Northbridge Capital. And standing next to her, wearing a long trench coat and a look of absolute calm, was Nora. "Good evening, ma'am," the first officer said. "Is this the current residence of Daniel Whitaker?" "It is," I said, stepping aside to let them in. When Daniel saw the uniforms enter the dining room, his confident smile faltered, then morphed into a look of confused amusement. "Officers, is there a problem if this is about a noise complaint? I assure you, Daniel Whitaker," Nora interrupted, stepping forward. She did not shout. She held up a document with a blue court stamp. "I am serving you with an immediate order of protection on behalf of Lauren Whitaker and her 2 children. You are to vacate these premises immediately. You are prohibited from coming within 500 feet of your wife, your children, or this property. Any violation will result in your immediate arrest." Daniel blinked, his face draining of color. "What, Lauren? What is this?" Before he could spin a lie, the woman in the grey suit stepped forward. She adjusted her glasses and looked at him with the cold indifference of a corporate executioner. "Mr. Whitaker," she said, "I am representing the Compliance Department of Northbridge Capital. As of 5 o'clock this evening, you have been placed on indefinite unpaid suspension pending an investigation into the misappropriation of client funds and gross violations of internal compliance policy. We have received the transfer logs." The words misappropriation and violation landed on the dinner table like shattered glass. The relatives who had been nodding along with his speech moments ago now recoiled, their eyes wide. Daniel looked wild. He looked from the police to the lawyer, and then his eyes landed on me. "Who did this?" he screamed, his voice cracking. "Who talked to them?" I stood by the kitchen door, my hands clasped behind my back. I did not shout. I did not tremble. "You did," I said simply. He lunged toward Lauren, but the officers stepped in his path. "Lauren," he shouted over their shoulders. Tell them you didn't agree to this. Tell them it's a mistake." Nora moved quickly, guiding Lauren to stand behind the wall of blue uniforms. My daughter was shaking, clutching the copy of her affidavit, but she lifted her chin. "You are lying," Daniel roared. Tell them." Lauren took a breath. It was a shaky, ragged sound. But when she spoke, her voice was her own. "No," she said. "For the first time in my life, Daniel, I am telling them everything." I moved quickly to the dining table where the children sat. Frozen. I ushered them toward the back bedroom. "Come with Grandma," I said softly. "Your daddy needs to talk to some grown-ups because of some choices he made. You are staying here with me tonight. You are safe." I closed the bedroom door on their confused faces, ensuring they would not see their father in handcuffs if he decided to fight. Back in the kitchen, the officers were escorting Daniel out. He was allowed to grab his keys and his wallet. Nothing else. As he was shoved toward the door, he passed within inches of me. He leaned in, his eyes burning with hate. "You think you won?" he hissed, spit flying from his lips. "You're just a bitter old woman. You think I will let you get away with this?" I did not flinch. I looked him dead in the eye. "Do you think I will be silent like my mother's generation?" I asked him, my voice low and hard. "You picked the wrong generation, Daniel." The door closed behind him with a final, heavy thud. The silence that followed was deafening. The kitchen was a mess of half-eaten food and spilled wine. My sister-in-law was the first to speak. "Eleanor," she gasped, clutching her pearls. "Why didn't you tell us we could have helped? You didn't have to make such a scene." I turned to her. "If I had told you, I said, picking up a dirty plate. You would have told me to hush. You would have told me to keep the peace. I am done keeping the peace. An hour later, the house was quiet. Nora and Mrs. Kelly, the lawyer, sat at my kitchen table with Lauren. They laid out the roadmap, the temporary custody hearing, the divorce filing, the forensic accounting of the debts. There was no champagne. There was no cheering. It was just the quiet, grim work of cleaning up a mess. I moved around them, scraping plates and putting the roasted chicken into Tupperware containers. Life had to go on. Tomorrow. The children would still need lunch. We would still need to eat. The handcuffs didn't stop the world from turning. They just made it safer to walk in it. That night, Lauren slept in the guest room with the kids. I lay on my sofa, staring into the darkness. For the first time in 30 years, the house felt truly empty, but not lonely. I listened. I waited for the phantom sound of heavy footsteps, for the slam of a door, for the tension that usually vibrated in the floorboards. There was nothing, just the wind outside and the steady rhythm of my own breathing. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. I brewed a pot of coffee and sat at the kitchen table as the first golden light of dawn spilled across the floor. I opened the thick notebook one last time. I uncapped my pen and turned to the final page of the Daniel Whitaker file. I wrote one last sentence yesterday. He lost the thing he valued most in the world, his control. And we took back the thing we thought we had lost forever, our voice. I closed the book. I stood up and placed it on the highest shelf of the pantry, tucked behind the jars of winter preserves. I knew I would keep it, just in case. But the story wasn't about him anymore. It was about the 3 generations of women waking up in this house, finally free to breathe. Thanks so much for listening to my story. I'm curious, where in the world are you tuning in from right now? Drop your location in the comments below. I'd love to connect and hear your thoughts on Eleanor's journey. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to Grandma's Family Diary, hitting that like button, and smashing the hype button to help this story reach even more people who might need to hear it. Stay safe out there.